This is Reasons We Serve, a channel dedicated to the women and men of law enforcement. This is episode 82, an interview with retired United States Customs Special Agent Chris Hastings. Beginning in the 1970s in South Florida, law enforcement was beginning to see a dramatic shift in the drug trafficking world from marijuana to hundreds of kilograms of cocaine. By 1975, Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel had established cocaine trafficking routes into the U.S., centered in the city of Miami, taking over for the Cuban Mafia, which had previously controlled drug smuggling in Florida. Members of the Medellin Cartel soon began smuggling between 40 and 60 kilograms of cocaine every week via airdrop, using small aircraft being flown by pilots like Barry Seal, who was made famous in the movie American Made starring Tom Cruise. By 1981, Miami was responsible for trafficking 70% of the U.S.'s cocaine and 70% of the marijuana, while making approximately $8 million per month. Along with the untold millions of dollars being made through drug trafficking came untold violence and murder. Beginning in 1979, two Colombian drug dealers entered a liquor store and killed two men in broad daylight, which came to be known as the Dadeland Mall Shootout. This led to ensuing turf wars between drug lords, and Miami soon became known as the drug capital of the world. There were so many drug-related homicides at the time that for at least a year there was an average of one homicide every day. People like Griselda Blanco, who was recently featured in the Netflix special Griselda, along with her hitman Jorge Rivi Ayala, were connected to as many as 200 murders. In 1980, Chris was hired by the United States Customs Service and began a career as a special agent until he retired in 2013. During the interview, Chris discusses the tragic family events that contributed to him being raised as a young man by the United States Customs Service. Chris talks about being one of only 60 customs agents in the United States to be cross-designated by the DEA and some of the many cases he worked on. Chris is the author of Cocaine Cowboys, Uncensored, a true crime story. Many of the stories he tells during the interview are taken directly from his book and feature stories about arrests, shootings, corrupt police officers, and helping on a large-scale money laundering operation that was featured in the movie The Infiltrator, starring Bryan Cranston.
Okay, so for the audience, I am here in the Philippines, and part of the reason for doing this channel is obviously to memorialize some very important historical events that happened in the U.S., and maybe I'll even get some stuff that happens outside the U.S., but I'm here with my next guest, and I'm sure you will be very interested in what he has to say. So with that being said, can you introduce yourself for him, please?
Hi, I'm Chris Hastings.
Chris, so who did you work for?
I got a job as a customs patrol officer in 1980 after being an intern, and it was the only agency I ever worked for.
However, with that being said, I found it very, very interesting. And just for the audience, you guys have watched the intro. I have his book up on the intro, so you can read the book. It was a very easy read, really interesting. But in the book, you talk about something that I've never heard of before, which is essentially you were cross-designated as a DEA agent. Can you kind of tell me about how that came about and what entailed?
Well, for reasons that really weren't expressed to me, DEA wanted to have I don't know if it was a pilot program or whatever, but they wanted to have the customs agents who were working in tandem with DEA. We were working Title 21 cases, not just 18 USC cases. So they wanted to have us some training and whatnot to be able to certify us to do Title 21 cases. And the powers that be arranged all that. And they sent us to Glencoe. I think all of us were Spanish speakers. And they sent us to Glencoe, and DEA put on a 5 or 6 week kind of mini DEA agent course where they had a chemist come in, that they had to they had a drug identification course where you can identify all these drugs, most of the drugs that we'd already seen our whole lives. And then they talked about, there was some legal stuff, legal instruction about how Title 21 cases are prosecuted. And then we were given a blessing, and they put us right back into our agency.
And essentially, though, you were literally one of 60
Nationwide, I
nationwide,
think.
which I had never heard of before, which was very interesting. Well, the reason why is obviously, paint a picture for me. You're working in South Florida, and this is during the cocaine wars. So tell me what's happening down there at the time.
Well, when I first started on the job, it would be if you got a pound of grass off of some seaman coming in from on a boat or whatever, somebody in the customs area. Cruise ships, a lot of the cruise ships would go to Jamaica, and you had a lot of weed coming back then. If you got a pound of grass, you were a superstar. And cocaine wasn't even on the menu. Nobody had heard of it. And then we started slowly seeing some of the crew members being offered to bring loads to Tampa. And so we began to recruit the crew members, most of them Filipino, although I did recruit a couple of Yugoslavian and some other Eastern European guys. We began to recruit them to bring the load and let us do a controlled delivery on the load. And we'd pay them off, and the company would give them a new job somewhere else. So that's basically how it worked. We went right into, at that point, we were already doing it, but we went right into taking the loads sometimes and taking them all the way up to Atlanta or wherever they were going. And that's why I think they wanted us to have Title 21, is because it quit being a customs case. In reality, once we made the seizure and did that, it really quit being a customs case. It became a Title 21 case.
Yeah.
No longer 18 USC. So I'm not sure if it was because of the U.S. Attorney's Office or the powers that be that wanted it done, but that's what they did to us. They wanted us to do that. And then I worked hand in hand all of those cases with a DEA partner. And we'd have them doing the importation cases with us.
Yeah.
We were basically one unit.
Yeah. Okay, so before we start talking about your career, though, and obviously for people that are your and my age generation, maybe the younger people that are watching, because I know there are younger people watching, how close was it to Miami Vice? You had all the fast cars, cocaine, all that crap that was going on. How close was all the Miami time when you were working down there? How similar was it?
Well, there was so much coke in Miami. You could literally go to a bar and the next day have a 10-kilo deal set up with the bartender. I mean, it was everywhere. And the money was flowing in to the banks, condo projects. Miami was built on cocaine money. And then we had the two Cuban guys who were the original Cocaine Cowboys, who did the speedboat racing and all that. And that was a cover for the importation that they were doing from the Bahamas or from Cuba or wherever. So it was exactly like that. It was exactly like that. I think I told you earlier, my boss, when I first came to Miami, he said, quit cutting your hair and get an earring. You look like a cop. And so that's what I had to do.
Yeah.
And I grew my hair out. Luckily, I had nice curly hair, but I had this mullet down to my shoulders. And
Okay, well, let's before we start getting into your career, let's talk about a little bit about your background. I want to talk about your mom and dad. You didn't have any brothers and sisters, so tell me about where you grew up and what was your family life like?
I grew up in Merritt Island, Florida, and my father was a Navy chief, and he retired and went to work as an engineer for NASA. And my mom was a housewife. He was an Eagle Scout, and where I grew up was a very rural area where we would go crabbing and shrimping and duck hunting, deer hunting. We were always outdoors, so I naturally fit in with that type of thing. And because my dad was an Eagle Scout, he taught me how to fish and how to hunt and all that. And then I became an Eagle Scout, I think in 1974, or something like that. And anyway, the it was just it was like a Tom Sawyer life. I mean, I would literally leave in the morning and come back with some kind of crabs or fish or whatever, and mom would cook it up. And in the winters, we'd be in the deer stands every winter, hunting deer and that sort of thing.
So I found it interesting because you have a background in martial arts, and maybe it seems like your generation in particular, because I interviewed the Chavarria brothers and Larry Roberts, and those guys were all into martial arts like you were. Why'd you get interested in that?
My dad had been stationed in Japan, and he got involved in taking judo there. So when we moved from Key West to Merritt Island, Patrick Air Force Base, which was not too far away, had a judo school. And I began to take judo with him, or go to the judo classes and then go to the judo matches. And he was like my coach or my corner man.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about this before and it's in the book, but can you tell the story about, because I think this is just kind of maybe that era, maybe that mentality, but can you tell the story about your dad at the martial arts tournament?
Yeah. I thank God for him every day because he made me the man I am. Well, there was a judo tournament for the Florida State Kodokan Judo Association. And I was I think it was like 12 and under, and I was in that group. And I had made it all the way to fight the last round to win the state championship in my weight division and age group. Anyway, I went against another kid who probably was a little older than what he said he was, and he was certainly a lot bigger than me. And so the first round, Kodokan Judo is not so much striking like karate. It's more like wrestling or jiu-jitsu. And the first round, he just stomped me into the ground. He threw me down 2 or 3 times, and he got 2 or 3 points on me, and he was just creaming me. And then the second round came around, and he pretty much did the same thing. And I went back, and I was tired of getting my ass beat, and I was being wimpy. I was getting wimpy, and which you could do a lot of things in my family, but you couldn't be a wimp. So I came back to him and I said, Dad, I just throw the towel in. I don't want to go out there for that third round. And he said, I'm not throwing in the towel. You got to go out there. And I said, no, Dad, I had tears in my eyes. I was crying. I don't want to go. He's kicking my ass. And he said, well, he told me, he said, you can either go out there and get your ass beat and take second place, or you can wimp out and become a coward And when you get home, I'm going to give you a whipping. And I couldn't believe it, because this is the man I loved. I'll tear up if I really think too much about him, And, but as I got older, I learned why he did it. I had to conquer my fear.
Yeah.
And he pushed me out there. He said, get out there or get an ass whipping. And I said, well, I guess I got to go out there. And I was so angry. I was angry at my dad. I was angry at everything. And I don't know how it happened, but I got him in a headlock and I got him to tap out. And I ended up winning. And it was the greatest feeling ever to conquer that fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Tell me about your mom.
My mom was from a family of like 6 kids. Grandfather was a pig farmer and a moonshiner, and they were from Jessup, Georgia. And she was a redneck girl. She had a beauty shop at the house, and her partner was a black lady, Mabel. And anyway, so we always had tons and tons of people coming into the salon part of the house, and she would do hair, and the Mabel would do the black folk that came in, and she'd do the white folk more often. And sometimes they'd switch up, but they became really close friends. And she was my mother was an artist and Mabel was an artist. So they started going to art shows together and they became really close friends. And my mom was Christian and real strict with me, real strict.
You're right. Yeah, this is in the book, but she's, for as strict as she is, it seems like she's pretty progressive, where obviously she has a partner that's a black woman, but I think there was a story in the book about maybe a homosexual person. What was that? What did she tell you?
There was one of her clients was a gay guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her, something like, oh, Mom, now you're doing fags or something, disrespectful. And man, she lit me up. She got nose to nose with me and gave me the Jesus loves everybody speech. And don't judge people. We don't care who he sleeps with. He's a good man. He's an honest man. And that's all that matters. And, she taught me the true meaning of Christianity.
Yeah. Was there anything growing up that led you to law enforcement that you thought, hey, this might be the thing for me?
Well, when we'd play cops and robbers, I always wanted to be the cop too, like some of your guests.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, in college I had a girlfriend and she started taking criminology courses and I took some of them with her. And I took a constitutional law class because I was thinking about maybe being a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was super interested. I had a really great constitutional law teacher. And so that kind of led me down that path. And then she joined, there was a pistol team. It was criminology, some kind of criminology student organization. And they had pistol competitions and they'd do training from local cops on fingerprinting and people that were interested in criminology.
Yeah.
And so I some of that rubbed off on me with her, but I was kind of headed towards ROTC in the Army until I came into, I went to a job fair and Border Patrol and Customs were right next to each other. And the guy, so I put my name on the application and he recognized my name. And he asked me if my dad was in the Navy. And I said, yeah. And he said, was he on the USS O'Brien? I said, yes, that was his boat. And he says, I know your father. And then the next thing out of his mouth was, can you start next week? It was kind of like legacy
thing.
And I said, yeah. And they were really desperate to get people. They were on a hiring binge at the point in time.
Why was that? Do you know?
Because what was going on in Miami.
Oh, okay.
We had the infamous Dadeland Mall shooting in '79, where the Colombians brought a war wagon with armored up war wagon with machine gun ports and the whole bit, and we shot up another group of Colombians right in the middle of the day in the daytime at Dadeland Mall. And it was really starting to pop in Miami. So they were on a hiring binge to get people, because almost everybody that was in my group was either in their late 40s or early 50s, and there was only 2 of us, I think, that were in our 20s.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how it was with DEA when I got hired. We were just going through all the older guys were retiring, and
Right.
yeah. So you start as an intern then, but
For 3 months.
okay. But before that, what happens to your mom?
Okay. At 18, I'm out working a construction job, laying block, and somebody came to the construction site and told me my mom was in the hospital. And by the time I got to the hospital, she was already in a coma. And then she passed later on that day.
What happened?
Some sort of virus in her heart, something to do with her heart. I'm still not sure to this day what it was.
So that happens at 18, and then it's shortly after that.
My dad was diagnosed with cancer.
I mean, literally within how long was that?
I think it was almost at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so that's about 18, and then your dad ends up making it you take care of him for about 3 years, right?
Yeah. At the same time, I went to college, and that's how I ended up. When I went to Tampa, I brought him with me, and I went to community college for a little while. Then I transferred to USF and University of South Florida, and I brought him with me. And instead of having him in a nursing home, I just kept him in an apartment for a while with me.
How old are you when he passes away?
20, 21 maybe.
Okay, so essentially at 21, that's it. Your mom and dad are gone. You're on your own because you don't have any siblings or anything.
I have no brothers or sisters.
How do you, a little off topic for the law enforcement channel, but how do you deal with that as essentially a kid, 21 years old? How do you keep moving forward?
Well, you don't at the beginning.
Okay.
And unless I don't know how you could not be affected by that.
All right.
I dealt with it with a lot of booze for a while. I started drinking a little bit, and it was an anger phase that I went through. But I had made a promise to my mom to finish college. She had a real thing about me going to college. And anyway, so I said, I'm just going to continue on and do that. I didn't know what else to do. So I'm just going to go to college and see what happens.
How do you snap yourself out of the drinking though?
Out of the drinking? That's a good question. I think mainly because I didn't get any peace with it. I tried it, but it didn't give me any peace.
Okay.
And I said, I don't want to be this guy. I don't want to drink every day. And I probably hit the booze for about 3 weeks before I said, this is not working.
Yeah.
And I just quit. And I said, I just focused on what was in front of me. One of the things my dad always told me when I'd talk about bad things that had happened in the past and whatnot, he'd always tell me, he'd say, son, life is like driving a car. If you keep looking in the rearview mirror, you're going to run into something. You need to look where you're going. Look forward. Don't look in the rearview mirror. And so took those words to heart, and I put it behind me, and I gave it to God, and I moved on.
We're going to talk a little bit about this at the end with kind of the two final questions that I always ask. But, we talked about this a little bit where, essentially you're 21 years old, you're starting with customs, you start as an intern, then you start as a GS5, and then you become an agent. Customs really kind of raised you. They became your family at that point.
Yeah, they did.
How? Because some people fall into this, and I know how fun the job is, or how fun the job was.
Right.
How did you not fall into the trap of or maybe you did. How did you not fall in the trap of, this is so fun, I am going to work 24 hours a day? Because, they're essentially your family. Did you have other things that you focused on, or was it just work the whole time?
No, it was just work. I got so much pleasure and brotherhood from the guys I worked with. And it was just such a relief to be around people that were like my father, people that I'd grown up with. I mean, these were all Vietnam vets, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And even the Puerto Rican guys a lot of them were Vietnam vets.
Yeah.
And because I spoke pretty decent Spanish at that point, the Puerto Ricans and the Colombian bosses that I worked for kind of took me under their wing. And I think I was kind of like their pet gringo for a while. I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. And the other thing is, I had a talent that a lot of people didn't have. Like, we had an undercover taxi, right? I don't know if you guys use those, but we had a real taxi with a meter and the whole bit. So when we do a deal and pick up some Colombians or whatever, I'd pick them up in the cab, and they'd talk right in front of me. They'd speak Spanish right in front of me, never believing that this white boy could hear. I understood everything. And then later on, I'd come back and testify against him. Yeah, when I was in the cab, he was saying this and he was saying that. And so,
how did you learn how to speak Spanish?
My neighbors were Cuban, and I grew up with this Cuban friend of mine, Fred, and I just spent so much time at their house. I just picked it up with them. And then Customs sent me to a school for Spanish, which I just kind of aced my way through that. And then eventually I ended up at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California.
But Chris, I think it's pretty unique that you just kind of picked it up, right? I mean, do you have a knack for languages, you think?
What I've learned later on in life is I'm an audio learner. I don't learn so much by watching a blackboard. I learn through my ears. And I never forget. If I hear something, I just never forget it. And I just have that. And I think because I'm a pretty poor musician, I'm sort of a musician, and I'm not a bad one, but I think that had a lot to do with it. I played guitar and I sang in church and stuff like that.
Huh. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about your career. So you start doing your thing. It's in the middle of the cocaine wars. What are you working on?
We start out working mostly stowaways, just plain immigration violations coming on the boats, on the banana boats, and some of the cruise ships. And we're making small little marijuana seizures, kilo, 5 kilos, something like that of kind of commercial grade weed. Anyway, and then it sort of changed right in front of my eyes. It changed where the crew members started bringing in 5 kilos, 2 kilos, 3 kilos, 8 kilos. And we had to go out and start developing informants as crew members. And we'd get them to take the load in Turbo, Colombia, and bring it in. And then they'd call the Colombians stateside in Florida, and we'd do the controlled delivery to them. And that's how I ended up in that shooting.
Yeah, can you talk about the shooting?
Well, it was it was in 1984, I think. And we were doing a routine control delivery of maybe 10 or 15 keys. I don't know what it was. I don't remember. But at that point in time, the blacks in Tampa were hooked into the Colombians because that's where they would marry a black female and then immigration couldn't touch them. And so they were legal. But the dope would come off the boat and go to the other Colombians that were living there. And they were mostly from Barranquilla, Cartagena, which is more of a mostly blacks. And it's a different mindset there. If you've ever been to Colombia, it's a totally different mindset. It's more hardcore. And these guys were gangsters. They were real gangsters. And so we did the delivery, you know, typical thing. We're in the room next door. We got the room wired up. We're listening to it. Everything's going okay. And they take the dope, give the informant the transport fee, and it goes into the car. And somehow or another, we blamed at that time we blamed DEA, but I don't know who. Somebody didn't give the bus signal early enough. And they got in the car, which we'd never wanted to let them do, but they got in the car and they went to leave the hotel Holiday Inn parking lot. And luckily one of the guys had pulled the gate, the big, like a roller chain link gate. And he had pulled the gate closed so that no one could leave. And they got to the gate and they kind of bumped it when we hit them. And the woman in the back, she seemed to be the woman in charge. And she kept saying, "Mátalos, mátalos," which is kill him, kill him, kill him. And her boyfriend was in the car. And we had him at gunpoint. It was all over, I thought. And as I was looking at him, he pulled his shirt up and I could see the butt of a revolver in his waistband. And as soon as he put his hand on it, my training kicked in, and he got shot. We got him out of the car. Somehow or another, she got passed to me, and they handcuffed him, and she mule kicked me right in the testicles twice, really hard, to the point where I saw stars. And after the second time, I got angry, and I grabbed her by the hair and I smashed her face like maybe 2 or 3 times on the hood. And she went dizzy, and we got her cuffed. And then I had to explain to the judge why she had 2 black eyes and a broken nose at the preliminary hearing. But
yeah. How did you deal with the shooting, Chris? I mean, the guy does he die or?
Yeah,
he does die. How do you deal with that?
I was angry. I was really angry at him for making me do it. And I didn't feel a lot of empathy for him, even though I'm a very empathetic person, personally. But I was just mad because he wasn't playing by the rules. The rules are you're supposed to give up.
Yeah.
And they don't always do that. That's how I found out.
Yeah.
They don't always do that.
Any residual from that, though? Did it affect you at all? Or are you just kind of, hey, you kind of caused this and you just kind of move out and move on?
Yeah, it affected me. It affected me to the point where, and I'm not Catholic, but I went by a Catholic church and I saw the father in the church there. And something told me to go talk to him. Mm-hmm. So I went in and I spoke with him about it. And he said, "Son, he has free will and he made that decision. You didn't make that decision. And you just had to do what you did." He knew what the game was.
Yeah.
It was a real good father.
Yeah.
And he said, "I absolve you any sin in that. You didn't do anything wrong." And I felt better.
Yeah.
But I slept with him a few nights. You know, he and I had a few arguments at night when I'd wake up and think about it. But eventually it just went away. We were so busy. I mean, you want to know the therapy that I got? We had range day the next day, and my boss told me, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go to range day. And he goes, no, you're going to go to range day. You're going to get back on the horse again. And so the sympathy I got was range day, and somebody wrote Colombian over my target. So there wasn't a lot of room. There wasn't a lot of room for sympathy there, you know.
So, Chris, tell me a little bit about, I mean, with that being said, there's no sympathy. These guys are, if it's a typical enforcement group, you're constantly giving shit to each other. And if you can't take it,
That's how we know you don't belong.
Exactly. But tell me about the leadership that you had back then.
Oh, wow. Awesome, awesome bosses. Victor Thompson was my group soup, and Victor was half Colombian and half American. He'd been a Panama Canal Zone policeman. And then when the zone got given back to Panama, he came and went to work for Customs. And he looked Colombian. He was Moreno or Trigueño, brown skin. And he was just, he was crazy. He was laughing all the time and joking all the time. And we would torment him and play jokes on him. And he'd go along with it. I mean, he liked it. But he took a real liking to me for some reason. And he said, you know, you don't want to be a patrol officer. You want to be an agent. And we all want to be agents. And you need to get some experience on investigations, not just interdictions.
Yeah.
And so he said, I'm sending you TDY to Miami for a while. And I ended up almost 2 years in Miami working an undercover case, money laundering case. And then when I wasn't on my case with the agent's name was John Billis. And when John and I weren't working our own little money laundering case, I had nothing to do. So I just worked. You know, I'd work all day long and go home and get up in the morning and go right back to work again. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And the place was always humming. You could go there at 2 a.m. in Greenback, and there'd be an arrest going down or prisoners getting fingerprinted or whatever. It was just because Miami was just loaded up with coke.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about Operation Greenback. What was that all about?
Operation Greenback was the first congressional certified money laundering group where we could take our proceeds that we made from money laundering and funnel it back into the undercover operation to buy whatever we wanted, to rent undercover apartments, undercover cars, jewelry. I went to the seizure cage and got a Rolex and a gold chain and tried to look like every gangster in Miami. And so we had it pretty good. I mean, I had a 280ZX, brand new 280ZX I was driving around, and John was the main undercover agent. I was more the administrator. I did some light undercover stuff with him, kind of acted like his gopher a lot of times.
But did you like undercover?
I did not like it.
Yeah, why not?
I didn't like the way I saw that how the undercovers were kind of used and abused a lot, you know? Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I first went on, people told me, you know, any monkey can buy dope. I can send a monkey in to go buy dope, you know? Being undercover was no big deal. In fact, it was kind of, you know, like on the lower totem pole of stuff. And at that time, I just, and I think John kind of turned me off because John, IA did somebody made an accusation against John, and IA did an investigation of him, and it interrupted our case for a while. And I saw, you know, and I saw the way he was treated by IA, and I was interviewed by him, and I wasn't treated any nicer. And I saw it as a way to get in trouble, for bad things to happen. So
getting back to Operation Greenback, though, what is it? Money pickups? What are you doing? What's the focus of Operation Greenback? What is the ultimate goal here?
well, we had different groups doing different things, but like I think you and I spoke about one of my old partners, Bob Starkman. Although I wasn't his partner, but I mean, he worked in our group. Those guys would take leads and follow money launderers around and do stops on them. At that time, remember, the Colombians there was plenty of Colombians in Miami with a visa. A Colombian could get a visa to come to the U.S., no problem. So we had a lot of Colombians that were on the money laundering side, but not on the dope side. So they would do the money pickups. Through an intel, we'd find out who they were, wiretaps, surveillance, typical stuff. And we'd find out who they were, and we'd sit on a house, sit on a car, whatever it was, and try to take them off. And we'd stop them, do a 1050 on them, and they'd have, $1 million in the trunk, and we'd ask them, like, where'd you get this money? Because they'd always give a consent. And it was always a consent search. And because we really didn't have a whole lot of PC Anyway, they'd consent, and we'd pop the hood, or pop the trunk rather, and there'd be, $1 million in there, and we'd say, whose money is this? I don't know. I'm just driving the car over to, Aunt Susie's house or whatever. Well, how about we keep it for safekeeping? And yeah, I guess that's okay. And then after a while, they started asking for receipts for it. Because at the beginning, they didn't even want to have a receipt because they didn't want to give their name up.
Oh, okay. Okay. But the goal of Operation Greenback was essentially you guys were cutting off the money supply.
We were going after, our focus was to go after the money.
Okay.
Strictly the money.
So tell me, we talked a little bit about this. So episode 11, I talked to Raul Diaz, and Raul Diaz, I didn't even realize how famous that guy was when I did the interview.
A legend, a true legend.
Right. So you talk about him in your book, and you also talk about the corruption within Miami PD and how Raul is kind of warning you guys. Can you paint an overall picture for me about how corrupt Miami PD was and kind of the integral goal that, or the part that Raul was playing back then?
Well, Raul, to give just a little background, Raul started Centac 26, which I think it's 26, Centac, which was Miami PD's answer to the Colombians that were shooting up Miami and shooting up the Cubans and moving big loads. And Raul got a select group. I think there was originally 12 or 15 in Centac, and he was the first group that got issued full auto weapons, because we were going up against guys with MAC-10s and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And he got full auto for all his guys, and then pretty soon we got full auto. And when I first met him, there was a meeting, and he was there at a meeting, and he was talking to all of us about to be wary of Miami PD because there was a lot of corruption. And his answer to somebody said, how much corruption? And his answer was probably 60% of Miami PD is dirty. Another 20%, somebody in their family is dirty. And the rest of them are trying to find a way to get out of that job and do something else. Because what had happened was they went through a hiring binge after about 2 years after the Marielito boat lift. They went through a hiring binge, and they needed Spanish-speaking officers, but they didn't do any vetting of these guys. I mean, these were guys that pretty soon, if you had smoked weed, you couldn't get the job. Well, then it became if you had smoked weed only 10 times, you can get the job. And I think they cut it off at doing coke. But these guys were all, they never wanted to be cops. They just had an opportunity to get a badge and a gun and act.
And I think that's a real warning sign and a history lesson for what's going on in the United States right now. You're having a lack of people applying to be police officers. You're lowering the standards.
Right.
And you're just going to realize exactly what happened.
Right.
Miami in the day with you.
Right.
Guys.
Well, that's already happening. They're hiring illegal aliens that do not have, they've got some kind of funky green card or something. I don't know. But it's already happening in Seattle and Minnesota, I believe.
The LAPD, I interviewed chief of police in Upland. He said that they're hiring illegals for LAPD right now.
And, for the common person out there that's not a cop, you got to remember, these guys don't have any root in our Constitution. They don't understand our country. They don't understand that people have rights here. They don't understand the Second Amendment, and they don't understand the First Amendment. I mean, when I was a cop, I can't remember how many times I got FU'd, and your mother's a whore type stuff from people, and you got to take it on the chin. You got to roll with the punches.
Yeah.
And what we saw is that the rookie cops that had came, rookie Cuban cops that had came from Miguelito, if somebody told them "fuck you," they'd beat the shit out of them. They didn't care.
Yeah.
They just didn't believe in this idea that, cops were rule enforcers. They weren't civil servants.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about getting burned by Miami PD?
Yeah, we had several of our surveillances where Miami PD, we'd be set up on a house for maybe 12 hours. And then somebody would say, hey, there's 2 Miami PD cops sitting out in front of our stash house having a cup of coffee. Like, what? And then the phones would people start making phone calls and whatnot. And then after a while, they'd leave. But they were there to burn our surveillance. No doubt about it.
When you're doing Operation Greenback and you're picking up millions of dollars, and I'm just going to ask the correlation here.
Right.
Why do you think the Miami guys were so easily corruptible? You guys are picking up millions of dollars, and you guys are,
We only had one guy that went corrupt in the whole time I was there.
Why do you think that was? What was the difference between Customs and Miami PD, or all the federal agencies and Miami PD at the time?
The vetting process had a lot to do with it.
Okay.
And I think, like you had guys like Raul who were Cuban, but there were a lot of good clean Cuban cops. It was so bad, to give you a barometer of how bad it was so bad that Al Singleton was one of the Miami PD homicide detectives. And I think there were 12 senior homicide detectives in that squad, and 11 of them retired on the same day because of corruption problems. And, when the cartel has control of the homicide squad, you can kill anybody you want because we'll write it off as something else. So they had corrupted the homicide squad. They had corrupted the patrol officers. They had corrupted the maintenance guys. We used to hear about the Miami cops leaving roaches in the ashtray, smoking weed in the patrol car. And so they were paying off the maintenance guys to make sure none of that got back. You know, somebody found an 8-ball under a seat one time, you know, that kind of thing.
But okay, besides the vetting, let me just ask you personally. You're picking up $1 million. You ever tempted? Why aren't you taking any of this money?
I didn't work for it. I had a good upbringing where it was better to be honest and poor than dirty and rich. And I knew that, you know, money is only transitory. And I just never, I mean, I always looked at it like play money, like it wasn't real to me. I mean, and it got to the point where it was, you know, we were weighing it instead of counting it at one point because there was so much money, we had to weigh it. And eventually we got to the point where we'd make a seizure and we'd put it in a seizure bag, seal it and seal it in another bag and have 3 or 4 officers write undisclosed amount of camp currency and then take it to the bank and drop it off. Because, you know, you get the count wrong and then, which is so easy to do.
Right.
And you get the count wrong and then pretty soon IA's breathing down your neck.
Yeah. But there was also something that you said that I thought was interesting. It wasn't just your upbringing. It was a brotherhood. You didn't want to let your other people down.
Absolutely. That's the true reason why. These guys would any one of them would have taken a bullet for me and I'd have done it. I'd have done the same for them. I mean, I love these men and I couldn't imagine turning my back on them and being a, you know, it would be like being a double agent or something. It was just wrong.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to explain it.
Yeah.
It was just, it seemed, I couldn't stand the betrayal. And we did have one officer, an IRS agent, an 1811 IRS agent that went bad, Michael Cruz. And he burnt down the evidence locker for, I think, $50,000.
Wow.
And, yeah. But he ended up getting busted. And when they arrested him on the job Monday morning and paraded him through the office in handcuffs. And it was the saddest thing. As he was leaving, people were going, "Fuck you, Mike, you son of a bitch." You know, I mean, people were angry.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, so essentially shit is happening in Miami while you're there. Tell me a little bit about Griselda Blanco and her main hitman and what they're doing at the time when you're there.
So there were probably about 5 or 6 Griselda Blanco type people in Miami at the time. She's the most famous because she probably killed more people. But that was going on. She wasn't the only one doing it. So Rivi, but she was most famous because she was the most brutal. When she did a hit, she'd tell Rivi to go in and it's like they do a hit in a restaurant, just spray everybody at the table. And even Rivi, who was a stone cold killer, would say, you know, "Everybody?" And she says, "Yeah, that's how I do it. That's how I do it. I just shoot up the whole table." Yeah. And he went along with it. So it got so bad that I'd call John, my partner, up and I'd say, "Hey, John, what's going on?" "Oh, I just talked to Wayne Roberts or somebody else, and there's 5 murders last night, 3 of them Colombian, 2 Cuban." And we'd roll out on them and try to gather intel from them. But there were bodies dropping every day.
Yeah, Raul said there was a murder a day. That's what they were averaging.
Yeah. And sometimes 4 and 5.
What's interesting to me though is there was, I don't want to call it a game, but it was almost a game because they knew who you were.
Right.
You knew who they were. In fact, can you tell me the story? They had you actually pegged down to how to identify feds on surveillance.
Sure, absolutely. And you've seen it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get these guys that come out of college, and you know, they really didn't do any time on the street like as a patrol officer like we did. And they'd you know, you'd call a meeting to do a deal, to do a case, and they'd all show up wearing a polo shirt with a fanny pack, short hair. I mean, they just smelled like bacon. You know, it was bad. It was bad.
Even like bacon.
Even me as a rookie cop,
yeah,
said, "What are you guys thinking?" You know,
right.
And some of these guys were more advanced than me, but
what I couldn't figure out reading your book is they would actually get briefed. Hey,
yeah,
idiots.
Yeah,
don't go out dressed up like that. They'd still do it and get burned.
Yeah. Yeah, that happened in Bob Major's case, and Greenback was the genesis of Sea Chase, which Bob got made into the Hollywood movie, Bob the Infiltrator.
Yeah, Infiltrator, the Cranston, yeah.
Right, and yeah, that's why I ended up being on Bob's and Amir's pickup crew.
Okay, before we talk about that case, tell me about, so in the last Narc, there's a guy, Felix Rodriguez, that is mentioned in there, and he is specifically implicated in terms of being there when Camarena gets basically essentially tortured and killed.
Yeah.
So tell me about your interaction with kind of dealing with that guy.
Well, I never personally dealt with him. But we took off, I think it was 500 keys or something like that. So we posed as a seafood importation company.
Okay.
And we did all the backstopping on all of us and backstopping on the warehouse that we had. And we had a warehouse with an office, and of course it was all wired up. And so we delivered to 3 different groups of Colombians on that load. And the first group was these lesbians, these 2 lesbian ladies. And they were really nice, and we loaded them up, put it in their moving van, and they had furniture stacked in front of it. They had brought furniture to hide it. And we had an air unit take them and follow them down towards Miami, where they were headed back to Miami. And they had spray painted some sort of paint that if you used IR glasses or some sort of thing, I don't know, you could see it even at night. So they had an air unit, I think maybe 2, and a full surveillance crew taking them down to Miami. And we took them off on the way to Miami on a traffic stop with a Florida State Trooper, just as a routine stop. You know, like, "Oh, where are you going? You mind if I look in the back?" You know, and that's what happened. So they were no problem. The second group was where we had the problem. That was the group that was connected to Alpha 66, which is designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. government. And they were the Free Castro, Bay of Pigs people. And Raul had warned us about these guys, but we didn't have any interaction with them until this one time. So we take them off. This was my baby, and you know, I wanted to get everybody I could, and so we delivered to them, and they were kind of hinked up a little bit to begin with, and kind of apprehensive. We got them kind of calmed down, and we delivered to them. Then they started to, you know, pull this thing where, "We'll be back with your transport fee," and we said, "Oh, no. And we got into a little pissing contest with them about that. Finally, they called in a car and brought in the transportation fee. They were going to keep it, is what they were going to do. They were going to rip us off. And so they got in the car, and again, it was in a warehouse with a gate, electronic gate on it. And they got the dope in the car, and Mike Powers, the rack, and I were the first two guys on the car when we took them off. And the one Cuban had a 45 on the dash, and he reached for it and he put his hand on it. And Mike was standing right next to me, and we had him at gunpoint. Again, this craziness. You're at gunpoint. Stop.
Yeah.
And I came so close to shooting him, and we didn't. He pulled his hand back, and we arrested him. But what we found out was all these three guys were Alpha 66 members, and that was the common denominator between all three of them. And Felix Rodriguez was the orchestrator of the whole thing, is what we were told by one of the defendants.
Can you give the audience a little explanation of who Felix Rodriguez is, though?
Felix Rodriguez is a CIA asset, whatever that means. And he was a Bay of Pigs survivor. And his claim to fame was he was the guy that killed, he was the guy that captured and killed, help me out here, Che Guevara. He had worked with the Bolivians, and he was the one that caught Che Guevara, and then the Bolivians killed him.
Mm.
So that's how he made his bones with the CIA. And I guess that gives you a get out of jail free card, because that's what it looks like.
Yeah, because, you watch that movie Last Narc. I mean, it definitely
It's breathtaking, isn't it?
leads you to believe that he's there as that bad shit's going on with Kiki.
I know who Hector is. I know his reputation, and he's 100% right on. He's the most decorated DEA agent ever. Do you know that?
No.
He was in a 2.5 hour firefight with the cartel in Mexico. I'm talking grenades and AKs and the whole bit.
Yeah.
He's a badass.
You have to track him down too.
Oh, you know who? Are we on camera?
Yeah.
The podcast that I did earlier with the guys from San Diego, the Mexican guys.
Yeah.
They all know him.
Oh, okay.
So there's your hook into that.
Okay. But can you tell the story about the hand grenades and Felix's fingerprints?
So they end up with Roy Black, who was a very famous defense attorney in Miami.
Yeah.
And Roy Black, one of the guys wanted to proffer and flip. And he was kind of giving us half a proffer. He wasn't telling us all the truth.
Yeah.
And so we got a little hard on him, and he eventually told us that Rodriguez was involved. He was the mastermind to it all. And the money, but he had justified it in his mind because it was money to mount for the revolution, to go get Castro, blah, blah, blah. And they were almost like a cult, these guys.
Yeah.
And so Roy Black said, let me see if I can sweeten the deal up. And somehow or another, we got a call, and he says, I got some grenades and I've got some grenades and some machine guns here that they want to turn over to you guys. So, because every supervisor loves a press story like that, right? Yeah. I go there, and there's a box of 100 grenades and 20 full auto AKs. So, we had the Miami bomb crew came in and took the grenades off, and we had them dusted for prints. When they came back, I get this letter, shows up at my office, and it says, this is a match to Felix Rodriguez. Da, 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 da. I think he'd had some sort of minor problem where he got arrested. But anyway, they had his prints on file. So they matched it. And now remember, all this is back when things were done on index cards. It really wasn't computerized.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I get this letter and it says it's a match to Felix Rodriguez, date of birth, da 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 da. So I took it to the U.S. Attorney's office. Gary Montoya was the U.S. Attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney. And he just kept looking at it and saying, Felix Rodriguez, Felix Rodriguez. He kept saying that over and over and over. And he goes, this is not good. This is not good. And then I kind of got excluded out of that room where all the assistants came in with the U.S. Attorney, and they talked about it. And they said, we'll be back. They told me, just come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about it, and we'll see where we'll go from here. Because I wanted to indict him.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I said to myself, I'm going to go over and get those prints, because they knew we had prints. And when I got to Miami PD Fingerprint Bureau, the Cuban that was there, because everybody was Cuban, I said, hey, I got this letter from you guys. You got a match on this. And he looked at the paper and he went, Felix Rodriguez? Felix Rodriguez? And I said, yeah, you know who Felix Rodriguez is? He goes, yeah, I know who he is. Fuck Castro. And I said, yeah, fuck Castro. Right on, brother. Right on. And he goes, I'll be back. He was really cold. From that point on, he was cold. And he came back and he said, I'm sorry, I can't find your prints. They're gone. So what do you mean you can't find my prints? I got this letter. He goes, I don't care about that letter. We can't find them. So he stared at me and I stared at him, and I'm a young kid and this guy's 40 years old. I'm still feeling kind of like they're on my side.
Yeah.
Then I realized they're not on my side.
Yeah.
And I left and I went back, and they brought me into the room with a couple of assistants, and they said, you don't have enough evidence to indict Rodriguez. I said, I got the testimony of the guy we delivered to. I got the grenade. Well, you don't have the fingerprint cards. And I said, but I got this letter. And they said, that letter doesn't mean anything. It's the prints that matter. Where are they? And I said, I don't know. Go ask Miami PD. And they said, well, it's too hot. One of them said, it's too hot to handle, Chris. Leave it alone. Don't bitch about it.
Who do you think destroyed him? Miami, CIA, U.S. attorneys told them to destroy it? What do you think happened?
I don't think it was the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay.
It was Miami PD.
They were enamored with Felix and got rid of the...
Yeah, they're not going to turn in one of their own.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a god in Miami.
Yeah.
If you go to the Bay of Pigs Museum, he's there. Pictures of him are there. And there's a museum in Miami, Bay of Pigs, and his picture is there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was like, we're not gonna indict Superman.
Huh.
And that's when I realized that something my old partner had told me from day one. He said, Chris, don't ever forget this job is not on the level. Not on the level. It's not what you think it is.
Okay, Chris, let's move along to the case that you helped on that ultimately Cranston stars in, the Infiltrator. So tell me about that case. What do you guys end up doing?
All right, so Bob Major, who was he was Sea Chase. He was the genesis of Sea Chase. And he starts they used this informant that we had used a bunch of other times, and they got into laundering money. They got a hook into laundering some money. And they they started, Amir, my old partner, when I was a patrol officer, started doing pickups, small pickups, and laundering 20,000, 15,000, things like that. Well, Bob took that case and he basically walked into BCCI in Tampa and told him he was a businessman and he had a bunch of cash and he needed to put it somewhere.
And for the audience, BCCI was a bank back then.
It was the 7th largest bank in the world. And it was involved in the Iran-Contra. It was thing with Ollie North. It was also involved in the bin Laden stuff. People can do their own research on that. But he walked in and they took him in with open arms and started laundering big money for him. And that's how Sea Chase began. And we started doing pickups in New York City, Chicago, Detroit, LA, Houston, all the major cities in America. And we'd pick up 800,000, $1 million, $2 million, depending on what they had. And we'd take 5% off of that. And that money went back in to the undercover operation to fund apartments, vehicles, whatever we needed.
Yeah.
But Bob took that case from a small little money laundering case and he grew it into what was the biggest laundering case ever, money laundering case ever.
Wow. Okay, so your career spans about 20 plus years. Tell me about the incident that ultimately leads to your retirement.
I got an in the line of duty injury. I was involved in a stabbing, and I got either contaminated blood products or contaminated medical equipment, and I ended up catching hepatitis C.
But what happens? Tell me about the story of you getting stabbed.
That's a funny story. That affected me more than the shooting.
What? Why?
Because it was so up and close and personal. I mean, to get like this with somebody.
Yeah.
When you're this far away, you still have that distance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you're right on somebody that wants to kill you with a knife, it's a lot different. They can kill you. You'll be dead before you hit the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. You all ready? I think so. I got the peeing out of the way.
Okay, so tell me about the incident that ultimately led you to have to retire.
So it was in 2000, or it was in the late, I gotta get my dates. I'm gonna have to cut part of this. It was about, I think it was in 2008 or 9. In 2008 or 9, somewhere in that period, we got a routine call that there were stowaways coming off a boat. So we rolled out on that. And this is in Tampa. Because I was going back and forth to Miami all the time as needed. But, you're basically putting out fires every day. So we get a routine call, stowaways off the boat. We're pretty sure that they're carrying loads too. So they come off the boat, and when they come off the boat, they open the hatch up and 20 or 30 guys will come flying out. And it's a free-for-all. And they're in the customs enclosure, which is fenced in. So they run into the containers and they're trying to get out, squirt out. And we were chasing them around, and my partner and I, George Sargent, had split up. He went one way and I went another. And as we were trying to make a circle to find out where they were, I came around the corner of a container, and there was a Cartagena or a Venanquilla Colombian. I just came around the corner, and I came face on to this Colombian guy, and he already had the knife out, and he had a bag with him, which was the load, because that's what they would do, is take 2 or 3 keys with them and start. That would be their starting package, right? And he didn't want to go to jail, so I come around the container. He's standing there. He's got a knife out. He tries to stick me. I defensively put my left hand down, and he got me here, just stuck it in me. And then I grabbed his hand with the knife, and we wrestled with the knife, and that's how I ended up with the cut here. But this is all in 30 seconds. And as soon as I encounter him and we start fighting for the knife, my partner, George Sargent, comes around and puts an MP5 right in the guy's face, and he drops the knife immediately. And I think I told you earlier about this. George was a highly decorated Marine in Vietnam, and there are books written about his crew in Vietnam. And he was the guy that carried the Frick 75, the radio. So he was always the target, shoot the radio, right? So he was really amped up. You'd never know it, but he was a real hardcore guy. And as soon as he put the MP5 in the Colombian's face, he looked at me, and he's gone now, so I can say this. He looked at me, and he kind of gave me the look like, can I do him? And I went, no, don't. But he was like, I knew what he meant.
Yeah.
He didn't say anything, but I knew.
Yeah.
And so the guy dropped the knife, and George kicked him and knocked him down, and got the cuffs on him. And a bunch of other people ran over. I didn't even know I was cut until I felt something wet on my foot. I said, why is my foot wet? And I looked down, and there was blood just all over my leg. And I went, what's going on? And I looked down, and my thumb was kind of mangled up. And I was bleeding pretty bad. And so we got an ambulance, and I got taken to the hospital. In some way or some fashion, I'm not sure how, I got either contaminated blood or instruments or something like that. But I ended up catching hepatitis C, it looks like, from that event.
And that ultimately leads you to have to retire medically.
Yeah.
But we were talking about this. You said that the stabbing actually affected you more than the shooting. Why?
Because it was so up close and personal, and I think it was because I realized how close I came to dying that day. And it really affected me in the sense that I from that point on, I had a different view of the job, and it was much more, I was much more careful and much less cavalier about what I was doing. And because it was, before we had always caught them, and there was no issue, no problem. And it was the first time they'd really fought us back.
Yeah. Okay, well, so Larry, I always end up with these last 2 questions. Just making sure the dog didn't
break
kick it
in
a little bit. So I'm curious about this because essentially Customs was your family. You had no mom, no dad. They kind of raised you, and the job kind of was all about it. How did the job affect your family?
Well, it probably didn't. I was married for 14 years to an American woman, a pediatrician.
Okay, so let me ask you this: how far along in your career were you when you got married?
I think I was about 10 years into it.
Okay, so 10 years into it.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of work under the bridge at that point.
Yeah.
So being married to her, did the job affect that?
Yeah, she was not a good cop's wife.
Okay.
She would complain, because you're going to miss every birthday and anniversary, and you're going to have to roll out at 3 a.m, and you're going to come back sometimes smelling like some girl's perfume because you were at the strip bar with the crooks. And,
Yeah.
And she just was not, I think the stress affected her more than it did me. I mean, I loved it.
Yeah.
And she was afraid of it.
Yeah.
She didn't understand it.
Right.
She came from a kind of a wealthy family, and she didn't know anything about the street. And it affected her. And then when I got hepatitis, she told me one day, she said, when we were arguing, she said, I never anticipated being married to somebody with a terminal illness. And which really kind of put the nail in the coffin in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially coming from a doctor, right?
She had no empathy. That's what I found out later about her.
Did you, during your career, during the time that you were married, did you have kids at the time?
Yeah, when we divorced, that we had a 12-year-old daughter, a biological daughter, and we had adopted a baby from Guatemala. We brought a kid off the street of Guatemala, and I brought her to America when she was 14 months old. And, she was more American than me. She wouldn't learn to speak Spanish. She looked Guatemalan. No doubt about it. She was what we call indiosita, meaning that she looked like an Indian. She was Mayan Indian. And anyway, she just had enough of all my crazy stories and being injured and all that. And I don't know, a bunch of other things happened, and I'm not going to get into trashing her, but the marriage just was dissolving right in front of my eyes.
How about the kids? Did your job affect the kids?
My kids, not so much, because they were too young to know what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah. My kids didn't. I missed some birthdays and stuff I had to explain, but
Yeah.
not so much.
How about this last question for you that I always ask, which is, can you look back from when you started your law enforcement career, maybe even now, did this job affect the way that you see people and see society?
Yeah. Especially after what I saw happen with Felix Rodriguez, and I saw that the game wasn't on the level in a lot of ways. And Hector, who's personally one of my heroes, Hector talks about it in The Last Narc, where when you find out that, the government that you're working for is really not working for you, and maybe not working for America, maybe they're doing their own thing, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And I had started to become very jaundiced about, that's a funny word to use from a guy who had hepatitis, but that's how I felt. Very jaundiced about the government in a lot of ways. And, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, I kind of started to see through the Matrix and see that it wasn't what was on TV and what was being told to us on the news was not the truth in a lot of ways. And when that happened, I went through this transition where I moved from my job into being a civilian again, but I could never leave that feeling that all was not really like reality, that there was something, the things were going on that were not kosher and not right. And the government knew about it, and maybe the government was in on it. And, you know, when I had other older agents tell me, the certain three-letter groups that work for our government are running dope right beside us. And I didn't believe them. Well, in the beginning, I didn't believe them. When I'd hear about it,
Yeah.
I'd say, oh, come on, that's just rumors or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw what happened with the Rodriguez case and all that, I realized that everything wasn't what it really was.
You mentioned this in your book, and I think you did a pretty good job of explaining this or trying to talk about this once you retired. There was a sense of a loss of purpose. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I didn't know anything else but that job.
Yeah.
I mean, that job was everything to me.
Yeah.
And I really loved my job. And I mean, I really liked putting people in jail who were scumbags. I enjoyed that. And, but when I began to think about why did I put my life on the line? What was I doing all this for? When maybe my own government was part of the problem. And that affected me. For the next 20 years, I went on a sort of pilgrimage to find out what was really going on in the world.
You and I have chatted a little bit before this, but what got you back your purpose?
Well, my brother-in-law and I we traveled all over. I lived in Colombia for a while. I'd go back to America, have my kids for 3 months, and then go back, give them to her for 3 months, and then that's how we did the child sharing or whatever it is. Anyway, so he said, let's go. He was a pilot for a major airline, and he said, let's go to Asia. So I had a buddy pass, and we jumped on a plane, and the next thing I know, I'm in the Philippines. And when I got here, I said, holy smokes, this is what my country was like before. The families are still together, and this is a very religious country, and I felt at home here. I mean, you're walking down the street, and you see some guy, and he'll say good morning to you, and you say good morning back to him, and everybody's friendly and happy. They may not have any money, but there's still a sense of love and purpose and family here. And I had lost my customs family. So it was like a magnet. I said, I think I found a home. And then I was lucky enough, long story short, he got a girlfriend, my wife's sister. He stuck her in my apartment for me to kind of watch over her while he was flying from Guam to wherever. And he'd come back and stay with us for a while. During this period of time, I met my mother-in-law and all of my wife's brothers and sisters just about. And my wife's husband died from cancer. I didn't know my wife at the time, but her husband died, and she was working for a friend of mine, and then that job for some other reasons. When she came to my house, this might sound a little funny to you, but maybe the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, you can't leave 3 boys without a father. And I'd already fallen in love with her, but, God spoke to me. And I said, I can't do that. That's my job. And that's what I did. And it tears me up because I know what it's like to be an orphan.
Yeah. I mean, it comes all the way back to, and I think it was so interesting in your book, Chris, that you basically, they tell you, hey, you saved us.
Yeah.
And then you go, you guys actually saved me.
Yeah. They don't understand that,
Yeah.
but I tell them,
Yeah.
you know, they don't understand that.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's true because I was lost. I wasn't drinking. I mean, I hadn't had a drink in years, but you know, I was hanging out with a bunch of guys riding Harleys around the Philippines. And, you know, some of my friends were in one of the major motorcycle clubs that's here. And, you know, we ended up a lot of times in strip bars and, you know, what bikers do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a girlfriend and I felt alone. And when she came to my house and I started talking to her and speaking to her, in about a couple of months, I knew I was in love. And I said, I got to get those kids. I got to get those kids. And I brought them here. And that was now I have a purpose and a task. And I have a direction in my life.
Yeah.
The beauty of this is all that love and brotherhood, I get to pass on to them. I get to give that to them. And of course, now they all want to be cops, which I'm not so cool about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they'll do the military or whatever, but, you know, I got to do all the things with them that I never got to do with my daughters. You know, my daughters didn't want to ride motorcycles and hunt and fish and all that. They wanted to play dolls and makeup. But the boys, my three boys, they can't get enough of, you know, guy stuff.
Yeah.
Whether it be boxing or, you know, we're doing karate here. And I think I told you before, they all have scooters. They're riding around scooters here. None of them have a license and the cops don't care. And you know, they've come from the province where everybody cooks over charcoal at night. And to live here, it's been a big change in their life.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep them grounded, which is the hard part. But so far, it's been wonderful. So far, it's been a blessing from God.
Chris, thanks for the interview. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for it. Niles, I can't tell you how much this means to me.
No, Chris, like I said in the beginning of this, I think there's a lot of history and a lot of people that have gone through some stuff. And the stories need to be told. And, you know, I read your book and I'm like, I got to get over there. I got to talk with him. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And if any younger guys are out there watching this or older guys that are retired, just because you give away that badge and doesn't mean you can't have a purpose and a task in life. Because there are people that need you.
For sure. Thanks, Chris.